Hey, well, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here, and for better or worse, the Minions are back. Despicable Me 4 just hit theaters. I have seen it, so let's talk about it. So when the lovable blue overall wearing yellow Minions first burst onto the scene back in 2010, Illumination Studios quickly realized that it had stumbled upon a cheat code for attracting family audiences to the movie theater. And now, after 3 Despicable Me films, as well as 2 Minion spin offs films, and even a theme park at Universal Studios, Gru and his gang of Minions are back in action once again. And at this point, kind of this series of films just doesn't have a whole lot of new tricks to surprise audiences kind of up their sleeve. The Despicable Me, kind of the template is firmly established. Really, the only question at this point is kind of whether that familiar formula still has enough charm to, to engage with audiences even 14 years later. I think the answer to that question will likely depend on just how big of an appetite you have for just zany minion antics. Personally, I think this movie was fine. I think despite kind of feeling more like a series of kind of episodic gags rather than a cohesive story, Despicable Me 4 does offer, I think, enough of the same high energy kind of slapstick humor to at least keep younger audiences engaged. By now, we all know the drill. You introduce a new supervillain, you sprinkle in, a few moments of heartfelt drama between Gru and his family, and then you just bombard audiences with just, as many minion escapades as possible. And hey, you have a new Despicable Me movie. And this fourth film does not stray at all from that kind of creative approach. And in many ways, the film offers kind of less of like a clear, singular narrative, as much as it is just sort of a loosely connected series of more like episodic hijinks and kind of loosely connected subplots. Because it felt like to me as if the filmmakers, had a lengthy brainstorm session of all the potential ideas for potential sequels, and then just being unable to commit to any one of those ideas, they decided, hey, let's just put all of those into our next movie. Because this movie kind of bounces around between about 4 kind of general subplots. You have Gru and his family going undercover and kind of assimilating to, their new community and their pompous neighbors. Another subplot, you have a teenage kind of wannabe villain that sort of blackmails Gru into sort of being her, her mentor to show her the ropes. You have the main villain in this who's like a kind of a cockroach man who has some evil plot to apparently turn people into some kind of human cockroach hybrids. And then they also introduce the Mega Minions, which are like super powered Avenger style team of minions who kind of began their career as, vigilantes. And if it sounds like there's just a lot going on in this movie, it's because there's just tons of different things happening. And I think many of these sort of isolated adventures really don't move like the overall narrative forward, if there even is like an overall narrative at all. And all that being said, like at the same time, in the moment, the story is consistently entertaining and humorous. It may be convoluted, but it never slows down long enough for audiences to get bored or just to spend too much time thinking about just how paper thin the plot is. Some animated films, like the recent Inside Out 2, I think resonates with a lot of audiences and, of all ages by probing the deeper realities of the human experience. In contrast to that, Despicable Me 4 seems simply content to just say, make kids laugh by shoving a minion into a vending machine. And I think if sort of people go to a Despicable Me movie primarily to laugh at the slapstick minion humor, which, if we're honest, is the only reason that these movies even exist, kind of from that perspective, I think this movie is a success. Although I will say too, I think what does kind of prevent these films from devolving into just, purely a hyper sugar rush is the fact that it has very endearing characters and enough occasional like heartfelt moments. Because Gru and his quirky family, which is now featuring a newborn baby, they're just likable and just enjoyable to spend time with. And another element that has remained fairly consistent kind of all throughout this series is the tone. The Despicable Me films have always had a somewhat like rude sense of humor. And once again with this film, there is plenty of slapstick, like potty humor and sarcastic, kind of tongue in cheek quips. And yet, while the tone may have some kind of rougher edges and just juvenile tendencies, it rarely pushes into, I think, concerning areas for parents. For example, there are some like kind of mean spirited words or insults like, idiot or stupid or loser, but there's no profanities and, nor is there any kind of allusions to. Uh, Kind of sexuality. I'm not sure like wholesome is the right word to describe the Despicable Me films, but this film is, I think, relatively clean and unproblematic. I took both my 9-year-old twin boys join me to go see this movie, and as a parent watching the film with them, there were just no moments that like made me groan or hold my breath for what might come next. As far as content to consider, things going on the surface of this, for language, there's really not a whole lot other than what I mentioned earlier, just some of the insults like stupid or loser, words that maybe you don't want your kid to be repeating, when they get home. There is one moment where a minion may or may not use the word hell. I think like fury of hell or wrath of hell or something, some term like that. Although minion speak is difficult to discern and it may not have been that. And there's a moment where a young girl is trying to showcase a new trick that her pet goat has learned, and the goat proceeds to take a poop on the floor, leading the girl to respond, "I said sit," which as the audience, at least as the older audiences in the crowd, leaves little doubt to which word the goat actually heard. And kind of in a similar sort of fake out sense, that's not a profanity, but maybe implies one, is there's a moment where a character says, "Oh, strudel," but they sort of draw out the S of that word and kind of fake you out, expecting them to say a very different word. As far as violence, really nothing going on here either, other than, there's some cartoonish, I think harmless Looney Tunes style of violence. As far as sexuality, only two things that stood out to me. The first is that the song "I'm Too Sexy" plays briefly kind of in the background of one scene. And then in another scene, a minion like dons X-ray goggles and he's looking around and, he can see like the skeletons and stuff of his fellow minions. And one of the other minions, there is like a banana, which it wasn't clear to me if the banana is like in the stomach or else like just kind of concealed in the overalls, which again, it's been previously established that bananas are the go-to food for a minion, but the placement of the banana can very easily be interpreted as a intended like sexual innuendo. And just a few other kind of content things to be aware of. There's a moment where some of the human characters are drinking what looks to be like margaritas. And there's also a scene where a minion is shown like playing slot machines in a casino. And then the villain, kind of Cockroach Man, at one point refers to a cockroach as being a miracle of evolution. As far as themes, worldview stuff, things going on beneath the surface of this film, the Despicable Me films, they are not known for their, exploration of deep themes, and Despicable Me 4 is really no different in that regards. I think beneath sort of the surface of the very brisk plot and slapstick humor, it is difficult to discern any real kind of fully developed thematic threads or messages. If there is any kind of thematic cohesion in this film, I think it's perhaps the film's just sort of positive view of the family unit. And in many ways, sort of that message, the importance of family, has kind of been the message at the heart of all the Despicable Me films. Beneath his grumpy exterior, Gru does have a heart of gold and clearly cares for his family, both, his wife and his 3 adopted daughters, as well as his newborn baby, and even like, to maybe a lesser extent, towards the minions to whom he is sort of like a father figure guardian. And in this film, kind of the challenge for Gru and his family is to kind of put the good of the family above their own personal interests, even when that requires great sacrifice, because kind of the whole family forced to go undercover at a safe house, change their identities, and really each member of the family as a result of that decision is required to step into the unknown and give up a lot of like the familiar things in their life that they hold dear. And they do so really without any kind of complaints. And there are, I think, some very positive and uplifting moments where the various family members kind of come to the aid of each other or just bring encouragement, through the struggles. So in the end, for as inventive as Gru is with his master plans and his very high-tech gadgets, the films themselves continue to take audiences down very familiar, kind of unadventurous paths. I think there's a very strong argument to be made that really each subsequent film in this franchise has been weaker than the one that came before it, and that the emphasis on the minion antics are almost like a sleight of hand to distract audiences from the fact that the filmmakers are clearly out of a whole lot of just new and fresh ideas. I think all that may well be true, and yet I don't think any of that is going to matter at the end of the day. Minions they're the secret sauce that make these films work, and they remain as irresistible, as charming as they were 14 years ago. I don't think Despicable Me 4 is a great film, but I do think it will make kids laugh, and hey, sometimes that's all a movie needs to do. But hey, would love to hear what you think. If you take your kids to this movie, or hey, you love Minions, you want to go see this, don't be shy, jump in the comment section, let's have a conversation about it. If you haven't done so too, encourage you guys, subscribe to the channel, become a Collider, get lots of movie reviews and a podcast and interviews and just other fun stuff. We'd love to have you be a part of it. But most of all, guys, thank you for watching, stay safe, and continue to collide through World for Christ.